Hi, my name is Karen Brown, and I'm a gourd artist, and today we're going to be talking to you and teaching you how to stipple. Stippling is a Victorian art form that uses black ink and dots of different sizes. So we're going to recreate a picture of this little goldfish right here using the pattern on our little gourd bowl and a set of pens. We're going to use just 3 different size pens. These are microns. One is a 03, one is a 05, and a 01. Each one of these pens tips is a different size. This is a permanent black India ink, so it's really jet black. When we get our pattern, we're going to take our scissors and we're going to cut out our little fish. We're going to leave a little bit of material around it so we can use to tape it into position. We have a very flat pattern here, and we're going to be putting it onto a round surface of the gourd. And because this gourd has not been sanded yet, we want to take a couple of pieces of sanding paper. This is sanding mesh. It's on mesh and it doesn't plug up quite as easily or last much longer than sanding paper, because as the mesh you can see through it, it doesn't plug up and it allows all the material to come through. It's also used a lot in the automobile industry because it comes in very fine grits. We're going to do the 320 and a 400. We're just going to go lightly over the gourd, sanding the whole thing. This one has the holes in it so that we can put a weaving on the top when we're finished. So we want to make sure that the edge is all rounded over as well. A lot of your newspaper pictures in black and white are stippled, but the machines that do it now can only get the dots so close together. Each pixel is a dot, and they can only get so close together. When you look at a black and white photograph of the newspaper, if you take a magnifying glass to it, you can see the dots. In doing it by hand, you have the option of getting the dots much closer together or much farther apart than you would normally see. So your stipplings actually become more realistic than what a printer can do. This is another one of these great projects that you can take anywhere with you, because all it requires is 3 pens and your project gourd. Once you get your piece, your pattern on your piece, you're ready to go. You can take it just about anywhere with you. So when you're sitting around waiting to get in to get your tires changed or get your oil changed or waiting on the dentist office, this is a great project to sit and work on just while you're wasting time waiting to get in. All right, we've got that sanded off. Take a paper towel, dust off the excess. We've got that nice and smooth now on the outside. We're going to look for a good spot to work on this. That looks about right there. Now, normally we would be able to just put this on here, but this is flat and this is curved. So in order to get this pattern to go onto the gourd so it doesn't distort, we're going to take our scissors and we're going to use a technique called dressmaker's clips. And what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to put cuts into the pattern at various points so we can ease this pattern, not cutting into the pattern but up to it. We can ease this pattern onto the surface of this gourd so it lays nice and flat. Now if we don't have any graphite paper, what we're going to do is we'll take the pattern over and flip it over, and we'll take our pencil and we'll color in the back of it. And this graphite will give us all the black we're going to need to transfer this pattern over. So we just go over the whole thing good with nice thick pencil. And that transfer, that graphite, will be our transfer paper. We're going to use a little Scotch tape. The first piece of tape is the most important piece. This is called your hinge. It is the first piece of tape on and the last one to come off. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this on. We're going to put your piece of tape right at the very top edge of your pattern. We're going to put it on the gourd where we want it, into position. Put that down on there, and we've got our pattern starting out. Then we'll take the next ones and we're going to put it on our shirt or your pants or anything that's going to have a little lint on it. In this case, we're using on the tablecloth because the shirt doesn't have much lint. This takes off some of the tact from the paper or the tape, and when you put the pattern on, this is done on an onion skin transfer paper. It's like tracing paper, but tracing paper has a wax coating. This does not. It's very thin. It comes in an 8.5 by 11 sheet, and you can run it through your printer, and the ink will not smear like it would if you were using tracing paper because of the wax on it. So we always use onion skin or vellum, which is another good transfer paper. Now I'm going to come straight down the body with my fingers, and as you can see, I'm going to put this together, and there's one little spot right there is going to overlap. So we're going to put our tape down, smooth that down. We'll take another piece of tape. You can use as many pieces of tape as you want to hold the pattern down, to secure it the way you want it. Now we've gone down, so now we're going to go across to bring the face over. Hold that down like so. Do another one for the other side. By tacking off some of this sticky on the tape, you're going to prevent the pattern from tearing when you take it off when you're done doing the transfer. And that'll allow you to save the pattern so that you could use it over again. The pattern we're using is a goldfish that came from the Dover Publishing Company. And this is an old woodcut piece, and because Dover has using these older patterns, there's no copyright infringement on it. And you don't want to use other people's drawings if they have a copyright on it, because that is plagiarism, and you can get in big trouble and be sued for it. So we want to make sure that we're using something that's legal. We're going to put this down here. Okay, one more, I think we'll have it. Bottom edge right down here. You can fold one over the other just a little bit. We'll get a little crease in there, but it's not going to distort the pattern any. You can put the rest of this down if you want to, but it's not necessary. When I'm transferring a pattern, I use a red pen. I do red because you can see where you've traced. Once you're tracing your pattern on, if you did it in pencil, because this is a black and white image, you wouldn't be able to tell where it was going. With the red, you can see it. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to go in here and we're going to transfer the image, pressing firmly as we go. You want to transfer as much of the detail as you need to see. As we work around. You want to make sure you get the entire outline. If you want to do the whole outline of the fish first, that's fine. I like starting up here on the head and working my way to the back of the body. There are all the details that you want you can put in now as reference marks, because once we start stippling, we'll fill it in to give it a 3D effect and make it look just like a photograph. If you're doing graphite paper, you would slide the graphite up underneath this prior to taping it down. We've got a little bit of a bubble right here, so I'm just going to meld that back over, fold that crease in there. Now this fish is a double fin. We want to make sure that we put the edges of both fins in so that when we start stippling, we know that we have both of them in. If we miss anything, we'll know it before we take the pattern off. Now in this pattern, because this is a double fin, this part right here is the first fin, this one's the second one, which we see. But in between here is a very faint line. Comes right down like so, and we're going to put this in to finish off this fin. Sometimes the subtle details are the ones that we need to put in. The lines in the tail and any of the fins we're not going to put in. We know they're in there. We're not going to add any of the scales now because I'm going to show you a trick to do in those, because we're not going to draw them in as little half circles. All right, so we've got most of the outline done. We've got all of our outline done. We've got as much detail as I want to put in there. We've got the gill plate put in. and the markings on the gill, both eyes, the details of the eyes, the mouth, and any of this outside fins, the muscle on the fin here. So now we're ready to take the tape off. Just start peeling them off. I start them off taking them off the pattern first because I'm pulling it away from the pattern, so I'm less likely to rip it. Never take the hinge off until you're absolutely sure the pattern's transferred. That's why we leave that on last. We'll take all the other tape off, and then we'll check and make sure that our pattern transferred well enough so we can see it. If you don't have fingernails, a razor blade will help get you this tape, pick it up so you can get it off of here. Just gently pick them all up. Now that we have this loose, we can flip this up and we can see that we have transferred the image of our goldfish onto the tape. We haven't missed anything. All of our fins are there that we wanted to see. The whole outline's there. So now we know we can take this off. So we're going to take our fish off, and we're just going to lay it over here as a reference. Get rid of the rest of the tape. And then we're ready to start on our stippling. Before we do that, I want to talk to you about some of the types of pens that you can use. As I said, we're using a permanent marking pen. The tips all come in different sizes. It's down so you can see these. It's kind of like a large, medium, and small. Each one of the pen's tips is a different thing. It's a felt tip. So when we're doing our stippling, we want to make sure that we're holding the pen straight up and down when we're applying it and we're making our dots. We don't want a dot that comes down and has a tail on it, looks like a comma. We just want solid little dots, nice little round dots. So by holding the pen perfectly vertical, we're less likely to drag and get a tail off. Okay, so we match these up. There's the 5. They're written on the caps as well as on the pen for what size it is, so you want to make sure you get your caps back on the right pen. Lower the number on these, the smaller the tip. There's also a set of 6 that you can get, and all of these are of different size as well. Gives you a little broader range of dot size. But again, these are just markers, and they do wear out and will dry up. If you really get into doing black and white art and pen and ink work, these are repeatiographs. These come with different colors coating on them to indicate different size. This has a reservoir in this end that you unscrew very carefully. There's the head. This was pretty much covered with ink, so I'm not going to touch it. But this reservoir in here comes off, and you use a bottle of ink like this to fill it up. Inks also come in other colors, so you don't always have to do this in black and white. But primarily, stippling was always done just black and white. You can use different colors. The repeatiographs come with different size points on them and can be refilled and used over and over for years on end. Once the chamber gets empty, like it is on this one here, you can see that there's nothing in it. So what we do is we'll take this off, unscrew it. Come on out of there. There we go. Now we've got this off. This tip can be cleaned by putting it in a little bottle with some Windex in it and just shaking it up and cleaning it all out. If you're going to be putting these away and not using them for a while, it's always best to clean your tips and heads out, clean your shafts out if you're done with your ink. And so that way when you put your tools away, they're nice and clean and ready for the next use. We'll come in and we'll open up this. Sure. There we go. We fill our chamber. Then we'll put this whole thing back together. The slides right in there. The collar comes up. Tightens it up. And then we put the shaft back on to protect the... And you're ready to rock and roll. You always want to make sure that you're using... I like to use the black India ink. says India ink on it, it's one of the blackest of the blacks. There are other types and colors of black, but they aren't true. Some of them will be a little bluer or a little grayer, not quite as intense. So the India ink is really what we're looking for. I'm going to put these repeatiographs away because they are way more money than just buying a set of pens. And the pens are replaceable, and you can get them in almost any craft store. So now that we're ready to start, and when I'm working on a piece, because I'm right-handed, I have a tendency to work from my left side and work across. If I started on the tail and then went this way, my hand would be going over the inked area, and it will end up on the side of my hand, and it will smear. So we don't want to do that. We want to start on the opposite side of whatever your dominant hand is. So as a right-handed person, I start on the left. Otherwise, you're going to end up what the artist called a dirty hand because you're going over here. You can use a piece of paper and put your hand out like this if you're worried about it, just to protect the piece. But again, I don't recommend ever going over and starting on the opposite side, so you have to go over the top of it. So we're going to start on the face and work our way across the body. When I'm doing facial features, I like to start with my finest pen because I'm looking to do a great deal of detail. So we're going to start out by doing just tiny dots. We're doing basic, just outline to put our pencil lines a little darker so we can see where we're working. Doesn't have to be a solid line. Just gives us a reference. We can always add more dots. Finer the dot, the lighter it will look on the piece. The larger the dot, the blacker it will look. Hence the reason for using multiple sizes of pens. Because in certain areas we want it fairly light and to look shaded. These dots are just as my reference, just as like my pencil lines were. Now I've got just as much of the face as I want to do done for right now. Now we can go back in and work in, because I've got the reference dots around the eyes and the mouth done. So now we can go back in and work on the shading. Because I know on my reference pattern that this part of the face is particularly up here on the top of the head between the eyes is very dark. So instead of using this fine pen, we're going to go to our largest one here. We'll get the big dots out. And then we'll go ahead and stipple this area in. You hear this tapping, it's too loud. I did it so that you could understand that when you're working with a pen with this tiny felt tip on it, by tapping it, if you could hear it, it means you're hitting the piece too hard and you're mashing the pen. The tip will end up breaking down and the pen will dry up faster. So if you just take your time and don't tap very hard and just press it down in, you can go at a fairly good clip, but you just don't want to pound it into there. And randomize the dots. We're not looking to put anything into a pattern. I'm just trying to get this original dark area shadowing done. We've got some dots in there, but the closer the dots are together, the more intense it will be. This is a good thing if you're really nervous with coffee, because you can really go fast. Makes your hand shake. That's okay. As you can see, we're filling on this in with more and more dots. And we just keep adding dots until we get the blackness that we desire. The closer you keep that pen to the tip, pen tip to the gourd, you're not picking it up and putting it down so far. You could get a lot more dots in more quickly. There is a technique called cross-hatching where you're actually doing lines in all directions. It's a different technique, but very similar to this effect. It's just, to me, it looks messier because you're not really controlling the edges as well. All right, now the lips are fairly white. So we're going to come out and do the outer chin and around the eye, down the side of the mouth. As we can see, we have the marbling effect on the gill plate here, so we're going to leave those areas without any dots in them. That way, when we get the dots to that area, it will set it off much nicer and pop those little white areas out. Because the gourd is not white, we don't have as much of a contrast between the color of the ink and the finish, so we have to play with the dots a little more to get that shadowing effect. It's just paying attention to the details in the drawing I also tell my students to get reference pictures off the internet. Google image search is great to seeing pictures. You can go in and say, I want to see a goldfish eye, and just look at the eye. You can go in and blow one out and print it out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet that's this big around, so that when you transfer that information from that eye into this one, it'll give you all the realism that you really were looking for. Reference pictures are excellent to work from. Again, we don't want to use somebody else's photograph. Now, I could have just gone in here and colored this all in, but the idea is to use just dots to create these pictures. The pictures from Dover are normally old woodcuts, so you'll see a lot of line work in the picture, but that's because they were cut from wood and they left that in there to be part of the picture. We don't need to add all those extra lines in. On this fish, we didn't have too many, but there are other pictures that they have. And in order to get this eye to separate out from the rest of the body, we're going to use a very heavy area of black dots, almost solid, to lift this eye off of the face. You can do stippling with your wood burner as well, using a ball type shading pen. I have them in several different sizes. Works just the same way. It's just a little slower process because it's heat transfer. So we're just going to continue on and work on the face now, and we're going to come around and do the rest of this. And if you can see, I don't know how well you can see that, but in the eye here, there's a lot of little tiny rings from the original carving. We're not going to worry about any of that. We don't draw any straight lines. We're just using just the dots to outline what we need. Now, I've done a reference going the belly of the fish going underneath and through that fin, and this secondary pectoral fin going through it again, because the fins are very transparent, and even though in the woodcut it doesn't show it, I know that you would be able to see that body line coming through that fin. So if we put that in now as a reference, we can add those features in and get that transparent look on that fin when we get that far down there. Even if we draw just that little line, we're not actually drawing a straight line. It's a row of dots that are placed very close together in order to give that illusion of a filled-in straight line. Because if we put shadows from the top of the fish's body and the bottom, it gives you that illusion of roundness to the body that we want to see at the fish. Give us our back top edge nice and dark so we can complete our illusion of roundness. All right, now we're going to start on, we'll do the fin so you can see how we're going to lay these lines in here and create that illusion coming through there. And then we're going to come in and do this one and fill these in. What I end up like to do is start out going one through the middle, and then we'll follow the edge here of the lines we have in, coming out, creating the veins in the fin nice and tight together, not solid, but just enough to give that illusion of those veins in there. Okay, now we want to be able to see the body, which comes from here across, so we're just going to add, without touching that white line, a little bit of belly shadow coming through there. Now we want to do the lines on under the secondary side on this pectoral fin, touching that, and then we can come around here and we can do the rest of that belly line. So we've got some wavy lines in here, so we want to show some kind of movement in the fin. So we can take our pencil, we want to, and draw some reference in here. We'll come in and we'll start by doing the front, and we will seal this as we work. If you have to stop and go back into the face, we use a product called Workable Fixative. It's matte usually. It has to say workable on it. If it doesn't, it's a sealer, and you will not be able to put more ink on top of the drawing. It will actually seal it and not allow the ink to go in. This, because it's workable, we spray this on here, let it dry for a few minutes. It'll be flat, so when it goes from shiny wet to flat, matte flat, then you'll know it's dry. Then you could continue on working if you have to go back in over an area that you've already inked. You also want to put that on after the whole piece is done to preserve the ink, so that when you apply the finish to it, then it won't spray, it won't smear either, because some products, particularly oil-based finishes, can be really rough on these pieces that of artwork that move, like colored pencils or pen and ink, things along that, drawing pencils, even graphite pencil will move. So you want to put a sealer down on it. And I like the workable because it allows me to go back in and work those areas if I have to. If I've forgotten something or I want to add a little more detail to the shading, I can go back in and work that before the sealer, the final sealing is applied. Now we're just following these little lines in, filling it in, giving that motion to that fin. And now we have our dorsal finished. We've got just a little bit more shading to do to create that. And by adding this shadow on the top edge of the fish's body, we'll also be able to add in even more. So we're going to come back in, randomly placed in amongst the fin, and randomize how long or how high they are and how they come out. I'm going to do the top first and then work over the rest. Again, I'm keeping my hand anchored to the piece, but away from the wet ink. I'm going to do a very solid line right up against the bottom of that dorsal. Right, so now we've got that separated. Now we can come in and just do our random spots. So we've got our first layer done. Now we're going to come back in and go about halfway out of there, adding more dots, but not quite as heavy as we're going to do on the belly, because the shadow across the top of the body is much lighter, as the water would have the light coming in from the top. So now we're going to come in, we're going to do the belly of this piece, of this nice fish here. This shadow comes almost up to the top of the gill plate and then just sweeps down back to the anal fin. We want to just go ahead and start creating that illusion, so it's going to come all the way back over to here as we're working. So we're going to sweep the dots all the way across the body. Then we can come back in and start filling in and adding more. In reality, I probably won't draw any scales on this. I'm going to let these dots act as scales. And by randomizing the whole area at a time, you're less likely to have rows or work a pattern in. We get a good start on that shadow. What we want to it still just looks a little too light down through here as our reference. So we want to go in and add a little bit more blackness down here near the base of the anal fin. So we're going to put that in a little bit more. Now for the regular scales, I think we're going to stick with this fine pen, and we're just going to do a random patterning in this open area here by placing just random dots, very fine random dots in here. Okay, we've got most of the body done. Now we can start and get that tail going. First we're going to do our outline on our front tail. This is a split tail on this type of goldfish, so we know that there's two, because we drew both of them in. So we're going to do the top one first, do the one straight across first into the body, and I just work out from the tip and lightly pencil these in. Now I'm only doing these on the top one. This whole section right here is going to have twice as many lines in it, because you're actually seeing this through this fin and this fin behind it. Make sure that the one is behind, to show that one is behind the other. Since we know that this is going to be darker, since it is behind, I'm going to go ahead and darken in just a little bit more. Well, through the magic of television, our fish is all done. We put a little bit of groundwork in and a few little bubbles coming up off of him, but pretty much the fish is all completely rendered, and all we have left to do is put a couple coats of spray, workable fixative on it, and then we'll let that dry and we'll be ready to seal.